Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demon Land podcast. My name is Andy, and the D's 4-game winning streak came crashing to a halt at the hands of the Brisbane Lions at the MCG on Thursday night. And joining me tonight to pick up the pieces and help dissect what went wrong is veteran Demon Lander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to B-Man. Good evening to our listeners. We don't only have to pick up the pieces, we've got to find something positive. So hopefully we can over the duration of this podcast.
Oh, positive? Are we meant to go positive? Because I've got a deficit well back. Also joining us tonight to analyse the stats and determine whether the Lions stole his red and blue print to defeat the D's is B-Man. Good evening, B-Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demon Landers. What a terrible, woeful night at the football. That was a shocker, wasn't it? So we talked about in the Port game where that ranked that particular game for all-time wins. This would all-time losses, but I'm sad. That's probably the wrong word, but it's not even in my top 200 all-time losses. But I have been a D's fan for well over 40 years. So, there's a lot of losses worse, but geez, not in the last, not in the last 5-6 years.
When was was it Port Adelaide game in Brisbane at the Gabba during COVID? The interim season, the second part of it.
The one that comes to mind most jumps to mind, even though we played actually better than we did in this game, was our loss to the Giants in Alice Springs last year. I mean, that was probably the most frustrating loss for a long time.
Because look, any of the finals, it's a pretty bad those last 2 years. But I'm talking about in terms of because the margin was 22 points, but really we lost that game by 10 goals. We might.
Oh, don't say that. That's like a non.
Forget the. All right, we'll talk about
that. Is like the score's the score. How many times is the boot on the other foot? Is that the right? How when we say, oh, we should have won by 10 goals, but we only ended up winning by whatever. It's the score's the score.
But we really lost that game. I'm happy that we only lost by 22.
Well, why should we? Like the expected score. Speaking of expected score, which we weren't, but that was bang on. Basically, both teams were exactly. So it wasn't as if the Lions left a whole lot of easy goals out there and should have won by 10 goals, but just fluffed their lines and they stopped to walk in the last.
I don't think they fluffed anything. I think they took their foot off the accelerator in the last quarter and let us.
The game goes for 4 quarters, not for 3 quarters. So 22-point loss is in the scheme of things, as I, noted during the game watching it. We don't get beaten by big margins very often. So the question as to which ones, I reckon we played round about this same time last year. Our loss to Adelaide in not dissimilar circumstances in terms of travelling and being flat against Essendon in Gatherand last year was, I think, right up there as a terrible, woeful performance.
Yeah, and previous to that, I reckon at some time in 2020. So they don't come along that often. So they really start to sting even more. You sort of remember we haven't had many losses if you look at our since 2021. So when they happen, they hurt.
Well, we're the most winningest team since 21. It's gone right, but we'll consign that game to the dustbin of history.
That's our first positive, isn't it? That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
It's a good thing.
And we didn't get flogged by, I got the opportunity to yell out a sledge that I regularly used in the dark days of the 80s and some big chunks of the 90s, which was to have a go at sledge the Lions and yell out that a half-decent team would have won that game by 12 goals. So that was a positive.
Well, you were sitting near me in a Melbourne section. So I
didn't get much reaction from it.
Preaching to the converted there. Yeah. All right, let's get into some reviews, and as I do each week, I put the call out for our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. And I say we love the feedback and we do read it out on the show. We would like to reward our loyal listeners who take the time to provide those reviews for us by giving them a shout out on the show. giving us that 5-star. It helps boost the podcast. It brings more listeners to the show. That in turn brings more people over to Demonland to discuss the mighty D's, and that can bring more voices to the show as part of our audience and our audience questions. Best way you can help us out, amplify us in the form of these reviews, or just by telling your Demon family and friends, your mates, get onto Demonland or the Demonland podcast. Would really appreciate it. Now, we did receive a heap of reviews this week, and we're so grateful for them. I'll read a couple of them out tonight and save the others for the coming weeks in case we have a few light weeks in terms of reviews, but don't let that deter you. Get those reviews in. Camo D's writes, are other clubs as fortunate? I've often wondered whether supporters of other clubs are as fortunate as D's fans, as we have access to a weekly source of joy like the Demonland podcast. In a mediascape filled with shallow analysis, the Demonland podcast has for the past 5 years helped my understanding of football evolve. I am pleased to write, I no longer yell, just kick the damn thing. I wish the same could be said for my mother. Thanks, Andy, George and Binman. We are indebted to you, Cam. Well, Cam, despite having learned better, I still do yell, kick the bloody things. And I guess old habits just die hard. Avec Sands writes, love the Ds, love the podcast. Always a great and varied discussion each week, not just of the game, but the commentators too. Waiting for the AFL to recognise hitting the post as 10 points will revolutionise the game and no one will ever hit the post again. Just saying. Well, thank you, Avec Sands. Your feedback's much appreciated, and we'll pass that on to it's not Gil anymore, it's Andrew Dillon. Maybe he can sort you out with that 10 points for the poster. Now, on our very own platform of demonland.com, we did receive some not so positive feedback. D-Blood says, love the idea of the podcast, but guys, you've got to improve your public speaking. Too many ums, especially Binman. Just listen to the Adelaide podcast and Binman's stats. It's ridiculous. Sorry, I had to turn off. Just couldn't stomach the ums. I'll try again next week and see if you fixed it. Cheers. I don't know how to respond to a written post about the way that we speak that was littered with grammatical errors and spelling mistakes. So, Binman, you have a right of reply.
If I was critiquing myself, the ums would be the least of the critique of personal critiques. I'm well up for well-meaning criticism, so I'll take that on board. And I've been practicing not putting in those sort of ums and.
It's counted two.
I know. I'm going to be super conscious of them now.
We're not.
To be fair, I confused sparrow and swallow for 3 seasons, so I'm coming off a pretty low bar for 04.
They're just piling up. I should have a ding sound each time you do it. But I would just reiterate, we are not professionals. We don't purport to
public. Couldn't get less public. I'm in my office at the moment, and George is in his library, and he's in his own private studio.
Yeah. So please forgive us for any ums and ahs that you might.
Yeah, and forgive me for mixing up Glen Waverley, Mount Waverley, Sparrow and Swallow, forgetting Fagan and Pagan, and any number of what are they called? Aphorism? No.
This is free. It's a free podcast. We're not charging you, so you get what you pay for.
I didn't think they were ums. I thought they were oms, and we're just realigning our chakras prior to setting our goals for the night.
No, yeah. Well, and for people, lucky there's no vision, because the sight now of George realigning his chakra is causing me some distress. So,
quick, Andy, get into the program. Go.
Because within that thread, where a lot of people did come to our defence, one person said our show is too long, but you can listen to these podcasts at 1.5 speed if you want, or 2 times speed. And I do see the irony of me talking more about this and extending the show, so I will keep moving. We do like to keep the feedback coming. We'd really appreciate a 5-star on Apple Podcasts, and please don't forget to click write a review link and write that review as well, giving us the 5 stars. We will read it out on the show. If you follow us, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, any social media, you can follow us there. I'll try to hurry this along. Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud. We're also on YouTube. Check us out there. If you want to chat with other Demon fans, it's free. Come over to demonlamp.com. You can start a thread bagging us on there if you would like. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics, 0390 163 0390 163 and I'll open up Skype now so we can take your calls. If you do call, just hang on the line and we'll get to you when there is a break in the conversation. Come join us in the chat room, demonland.com/podcast. We'll answer any of your questions or comments there if you choose to make them. We're live every Monday. We probably won't be live next week because we have a bye. But head on over to demonland.com in 2 weeks' time on Monday night, and we'll see you then. Let's get into the match overview. From the very beginning of the contest, it was clear that the tide might turn in Brisbane's favour. Max Gawn consistently bested his opponent in ruck contest, propelling Brisbane's midfielders to either win or neutralise the ground battles, and repeatedly they did so until they prevailed. And whilst Melbourne did score first through Neil Bullen, Brisbane quickly clamped down on their opponents everywhere except in ruck engagements, leading to a thorough rout. Yet, even in Gawn's standout performance benefited Brisbane more, as illustrated by the stats. The D's may have led the hitouts 58-27, suggesting dominance, yet Brisbane outmanoeuvred them with superior clearance stats of 44-35, easing up only towards the end of the game. And labelled a season-defining match for Brisbane, this game could have derailed their top four aspirations. However, this victory seemed to set their season back on course. Cam Rayner shone brilliantly, taking control from the start with impressive stats that included 25 disposals and 9 clearances by game's end. Josh Dunkley, 30 disposals, and Lachie Neale, 29, also excelled, overshadowing Melbourne's key trio, Petrarca, Viney and Oliver, who combined for 61 disposals and 10 clearances between them. After a triumphant visit to Adelaide, Melbourne were poised to enter the bye on a high, but the gruelling schedule and another exhaustive game revealed their depletion, culminating in a dismal 3-goal tally over their last 4 quarters, from the fourth quarter of round 4 to the third quarter, a three-quarter time in round 5. The team's young players, including debutant Colton Tolstrup, faced a steep learning curve underscored by Melbourne's struggle to transition from defence, which Brisbane exploited ruthlessly. Despite Brisbane's aggressive play putting Melbourne's defence under severe strain, defenders like Stephen May and Jake Lever managed to contain Brisbane to 82 points, a small consolation in a night of overwhelming disappointment for the D's. The absence or the injury of Christian Salem, alongside other setbacks, added to a night where the Lions, needing little tactical adjustment, comfortably dominated the proceedings. The D's last quarter dominance on the scoreboard belied what could have been an even bigger defeat, big man, since 2020. The bye could not have come any sooner. Big man, you want to go? Before we get into your stats, anything you want to add about the game? Start with you, big man, and then George.
Just do my best goody voice. I'd say we were smashed in all phases of the game. I think it would be fair enough. I think we were smashed in all phases of the game, and that was reflected. I think the game was reflected to a large degree. The top 5 players in the AFL player ratings were, remarkably Gawn. It's just another big tick for him as a leader and a player this season. He's been incredible. He had another game plus 20.6. He was the number 1 rated player on the ground, but after that, the top 5 was Hugh McCluggage, Lachie Neale, and Cam Rayner, and we had Jake Lever at number 6. I reckon there would be very few games that Jake Lever would be that high in our player ratings, or our second highest rated player. So, they were terrific, the Lions, and I think nothing should be taken away from how well they played. I thought their pressure was amazing, and I said this is without a word of a lie for punters out there. I said to my mate just before the ball was bounced is that we were $1.45 favourites for that match, and I said that if we were ever to start betting against Melbourne, which we have a rule not to, this would be the game, because they are ridiculous odds, and it should have been much closer to us still favourites, but $1.70 or something, because, they're a good side. Lions, as I said, pre-season, they've had a bad start to the season, that's for sure, but they've got quality across all the lines. And, once again, those medium small forwards that I talked about last week, or the medium forwards, the McCluggages and Bailey, he didn't have such a great game, but Cameron and who's the other, Lincoln McCarthy, again, they really caused us lots of issues. And it was crazy to see when Salo going out, obviously hurt, but it was crazy to see Oliver go back and play half-back flank. He didn't look like he was much of a half-back flanker. I don't mean that in a rhyming sense or a rhyming slang sense, but he didn't. He looked all at sea down there. So I know there's some questions about that. So we'll get into that.
George?
Not a lot more to add. We were cooked, obviously, and we'll talk about that later on. Right from the very start, it was pretty obvious that there wasn't any run in the legs. Losing Cozzy, for example, I think was a dramatic influence on the game. Then when you drop Salem out of the side shortly after the game had started, that created all sorts of flow-on effects, and I don't think we really recovered. Oliver was obviously carrying a hand injury, couldn't pick up the ball, and
couldn't tackle with it either, George.
No. So we're already missing Brayshaw from last year, and you take out Cozzy, Oliver, and Salem on top of that. It was pretty obvious why we were being smashed around the clearances. You can't expect Petrarca and Viney to do the whole lot against what is a very good midfield. There's no denying Dunkley, Rayner, and Lockie Neal are right at the top of the game. So I wasn't as impressed as others about Gawn's game. He came good in the last quarter, but up to the three-quarter time, he'd only taken one mark. And his biggest asset to us has been his marking. Whether Brisbane took the foot off the accelerator, I don't know. I suspect if I was Chris Fagan, I would have. What's the point when you're 7 goals up, effectively at three-quarter time? I was disappointed in the coaching as well. We didn't adjust to their game plan until it was 10 minutes in the third quarter. We finally changed. But up to that point, we were playing a game that suited Brisbane beautifully the way they were playing. It wasn't surprising the ball kept going from one end of the ground down to the other, virtually untouched by Melbourne players. But we'll talk about all those factors a bit further on. But the bottom line is we were cooked. We had a lot of cooked players, and we lost even more players when the game started.
And I reckon Salo was a big out. I don't know that Wowie looked at that comfortable down back either.
No.
And it actually was interesting. I know there's a question about defence, so I won't go into it too much now, but it really did make me sort of but think about how hard it can be as a defender. It's often considered easier to play down there. We talked about that last week, but I think it goes to how effective Howes has been, but the length of time it took him to build his skill set to go in. And because Wowie, and same has to be said of Oliver as well, they both looked all at sea at different times, just in terms of how they structured up and where they were, when to zone off. So, yeah, definitely Salem hurt us. I don't think it was a difference maker, though. But another comment on that margin, though, is that if I was Fagan, I would be furious because they got the 4 points, sure, but in terms of playing us, if they'd won by 40, 50 points, of course, their percentage would have improved, but more significantly, ours would have gone backwards. So for any percentage points they were able to gain in that match, we lose, you could effectively, not double it, but you know what I mean? It's sort of, if you've got the opportunity to get percentage on a contender who's someone's in the frame that you might be contending with come September, then I suspect they'd be disappointed they didn't get a bigger margin, but I think they stopped to a crawl. I don't think they put the queue in the wreck.
But I think we also have to give credit to the defence.
Our defence. Yeah.
Our defence, yeah. They did a magnificent job. It should have been a 12-goal game the way they were playing. And to hold them to 80-odd points was just a fantastic effort. And again, when you lose a player of Salem's quality and you're trying to plug the hole with someone who's never played in the back line ever in his career, like Oliver, and then you've got a first-year player or very young players trying to do the rotations in the back line, it's not surprising, but the rest of the team held up really well, so all credit to them.
Absolutely agree.
All right, big man, let's get into your stats. We don't want to give any of our detractors in terms of
detractors. So as George noted, we were cooked. And so sort of apologies in advance for long-time Demon Land listeners, and for anyone new. A hobby horse of mine for a long time has been the lack of focus by the media, and in general sort of footy land about the impact of fatigue, the impact of the physical preparation. I think it's a huge factor in football. I've talked about this now for a couple of years, and I just don't think you can, have if you're trying to understand what happened in a game and why things happen. So in this instance, why we played so poorly and why did we lose? If you don't include all of the factors and assess all of the factors, then I don't think you can arrive at a satisfactory answer. So I've talked about the red and blueprint, about the elements being defence, contest. They're our DNA. They're going to be in there no matter what method we play. So this year, the 2024 red and blueprint, transition, back half football, so scores from defensive half being the key indicator for that. Scores from turnover was important last year, but it's critical this year. And then the last one that I talked about is fitness, which is really key to our game in particular, but it's key to all games. It's really hard to measure. And so tonight, just with the stats file, I'm going to invert that and invert the order of going through them and start with fitness. And fitness is not quite the right word, so I need to work out what I think the right word is. But maybe it's fatigue, maybe it's physical preparation, maybe it's the high performance. So I'll get the language right. But fitness isn't quite the right word. But basically, if you're fatigued, as George said, it was evident right from the get-go, really, that we were cooked, and whatever the sort of causes for that, the fact remains that the eyes said we were cooked, and that's going to make it difficult to perform at their best. So thanks to Engorged Onions, who posted earlier today on Demonland. This is from Andrew Stafford. He's quoting from Andrew Stafford in The Age. So I'm reading from that. Spare a thought for Petrarca and Oliver. Both were far below their best, with 38 possessions and just 3 clearances combined for the match. But the D's were playing their third game in just 13 days, after backing up a narrow win over Port Adelaide on March 30th, with a 15-point victory over the Crows on April 4th. For gather round, both games were at Adelaide Oval. Is it any wonder they look flatter than the Nullarbor? The early start to the season, with 8 teams playing opening round and buys everywhere you look, has resulted in some deeply iniquitous scheduling. Collingwood also played 3 games in 13 days after a shortened pre-season. They'll play another 3 in 13 after their bye this week. The fixture is contentious enough already without placing such insane demands on the athletes who need adequate time to recover between half marathons. And I reckon that's the key point. They run a half marathon. Every single player runs more than 10 kilometres a game these days. And they really, the aerobic demands are nuts. And I replied to that. Oh, sorry, Andy, were you going to?
No, all I was going to just interject is it's not just, what'd you say, 3 games in 13 days?
That was at this block of
It's actually 4 games in 19 days as well. So
and travel as well, and
travel. Even though Lauderdale not coming back to Melbourne, but still, it's the travel, being away from home. 4 games in 19 days. Continue.
Absolutely. And so I that was terrific to see that from a journo, because I thought, well, finally a footy journo makes to me, it's a bog obvious point about the impact of the insane aerobic demands on AFL players in the modern game and what it means for the actual games that we watch. And I also really like the fact that Stafford factored the impact of those aerobic demands into his analysis of how the game played out and what it meant. The job of footy journos is helping fans understand the game, and they do us all a disservice if they ignore one of the critical factors, or a critical factor like physical readiness, whatever language, fatigue, and the impact of fatigue on performance. Because so take the loss to the Lions. What are the reasons we lost? There's the post-match thread on Demonland, which is always great reading after a loss. in that thread, posters highlighted factors such as poor coaching, poor selections, players mentally not strong enough, being smashed at the contest, not enough pressure, not running two ways. All of that stuff was highlighted in the post match thread, and fair enough too, because all of them were definitely factors. They were definitely the symptoms, if you like. They pointed to why we lost. But the impact of fatigue, if the impact of fatigue is also not factored into the analysis of our performance, you're only left with those factors as potential reasons for the loss, which means that by definition, the assessment's got to be off. So, for example, our all-team defence is incredibly taxing, as we've talked about heaps of times, as is winning the clearance count, as is applying elite levels of pressure, as is setting up one down at the stoppages, as is defensively going to work, as is trying to win stoppages. All of those things are incredibly taxing physically. So logic says that if players are fatigued, these and other key elements of our method will be more difficult to implement. That's just Occam's razor at work. It's just logic. And they will be reflected in the stats. Obviously as well, if the other team is up and about and isn't as fatigued as us, and I'm not saying that was the case in this game, our chances of winning will decrease. It's just, and if you don't, I guess my hobby horse is the media, just don't factor that in. And so it feels to me like their analysis has always got this big hole in it. And Goodies was asked that question in the post-match presser about fatigue, and he gave his answer, spoke to the reason why it's not properly factored in, which is we don't want to use it as an excuse. And it's hard baked into the culture of AFL footy and footy generally is, you can never make, any reason is seen as an excuse. And that's exactly what Goody said. We, would never make that excuse. But, if he was being honest, it's definitely was a factor. So, factoring in fatigue is not making excuses. It's simply ensuring all the potential reasons for a performance are considered. So were the D's fatigued against the Lions? The eye test says absolutely yes. There's no question. Everyone watching the game surely could see it. As George said, that was the first thing he said about the game. We were cooked. What was the cause of the fatigue? Well, who knows, obviously. Perhaps as Stafford suggests, it was simply that we were playing our third game in just 13 days, which included a physically draining and psychologically and physically intense win over Port, and backing up 5 days later to beat the Crows, both at Adelaide Oval, both in front of, baying opposition fans. So really tough games and travel thrown in there for the mix. It's also clear that we targeted those games, that whole business trip theme that came from the players. There's no doubt we went with a plan from the beginning of the season to go to Adelaide and win 2 games of football. To do so, to maximise our chances of winning both, they would have designed their high-performance program to peak for both games. So if that's the case, and I'm assuming it is it possible then to be in peak shape, to back up again? Is it possible to be in peak shape for 3 games in a row? And I'm increasingly thinking, no, it's not in modern footy. At least it's difficult. And perhaps in addition to the above, we also took the opportunity to get a heavy training block in ahead of our bye to take advantage of the 2-week break to the Tigers game. So allowing the players time to recover and taper coming into the bye. Now, maybe we did, maybe we didn't. And that may not be the case, of course, but I think equally it shouldn't be rejected out of hand. That's the case. In that context, just in thinking of that, it's worth noting that the pre-bye record, so the teams that played in the opening round have all just about had their buys. I'm thinking actually they have had all their buys. So all bar 2.
It's just us and Richmond now this week.
Yeah. And now I just realised, Andy, that I haven't thrown to you for those questions. So.
Oh, yeah, we did have a number of questions. I do want to give them their dues. Sam6172, disappointed but not surprised. Brisbane with plenty to play for. I'll move on more than just event. 5-day breaks, we have 2. Did a bit of research, and there are 9 teams who have had 5-day breaks throughout their season. 5 have 0 5-day breaks, and we are one of 4 unlucky ones with 2. Is there any rhyme or reason to how these are given out? I don't think there is. They are a blight on the game, and without going overboard, I feel like they're dangerous. These guys aren't playing lawn bowls. It's an extremely intense, rough and unforgiving sport, and the AFL are playing with players' well-being, not to mention the quality of the game, purely for TV viewers and ad revenue. We weren't at our best tonight, and I certainly don't believe that was purely fatigue, as you've alluded to. There are areas we need to work on, but 3 games in 13 days is less than ideal scheduling, to put it mildly. The boys have to be feeling the effects of that. I think the bye will be great for us. Demon Cat, disappointing loss, not unforeseen one, given it was our 3rd game in 2 weeks and we were coming up against a premiership contender desperate to make a statement. My question for you all is, how much of a loss can be attributed to being physically exhausted after our Adelaide road trip versus the systematic problems that were identified around us, consistently losing inside 50s, contested possessions and time in forward half in our last few games? In other words, would simply having fresher legs allowed us to better employ the red and blueprint Bin Man has been discussing? Or were those statistical losses in our previous games a canary in the coal mine that pointed to larger issues and suggested we were playing in a way that wasn't sustainable? Look forward to the discussion and go D's. Phil C says, more a comment than a question, but we looked very flat against the Crows as well as against the Brisbane Lions. I'm hoping it's simply fatigue and we can come back after the break refreshed. Our focus must be to bank enough wins to make the top 4 and hopefully enter finals with a healthy list. Victoria L on Facebook writes, hi Deberland, torture having to wait to get until Monday for the podcast to drop. So the only shining light last night was I tipped Brisbane to win by 24 points. 6 games on 6 weeks versus 5 in 6. And what a load of crap from Brisbane about the double travel in 6 days. Last week, they played a VFL side and built confidence with the knowledge they were under heavy scrutiny. Kudos to Goody for not making excuses, and it definitely wasn't our best, but it was easy to see the flat-footed mids we love struggling to take those first few steps. George is always highlighting for leg speed. Primary example was Oliver's handball to Viney in front of the Lions' goal, intercepted and score. Besides the decision to handball across the face instead of the outside, that would normally be eating ice cream for a good exit from the back half, they looked cooked. And you can be as fit as you like, but let's add up some of those kilometres on body contests and see the tank available. Reading the Melbourne media, you'd think Melbourne had just exited finals in a double loss. Clearly, we have some things to do from my frustrated lounge room. The mistakes and turnovers appear to be from a flat and frustrated players rather than Melbourne being second rate. Brisbane have been thereabouts for ages. A good couple of weeks recovery, sharpening up and planning for the Tigers should surely see us winning on the battlefield at the G come Anzac Days. I'm not too stressed. Help me, D. Milan. Tell me our game was affected and what was abnormal from our best pressure players, efficiency ratings and contested plays that we will be better after the bye. Nairobi Demon says, watch the game on replay this evening and I thought we looked slow and indecisive from the beginning, so much so that I started wondering whether we decided to take advantage of our 4-1 start and the upcoming bye to put some extra miles into the legs during the week. I went through the Sunday and Wednesday training threads, but I couldn't find any suggestion that there were heavy sessions with extra loads. Do the stats confirm our fitness was down? And if so, do you think it was because it was our 3rd game in 13 days? Or is it possible that we were also assigned extra running outside of our 2 main training sessions this week? Bin Man, tell me we're not loading already.
Well,
you don't want to blame fatigue or the grueling schedule.
Well, as an example of this not being a professional pod, I meant to ask you to ask all of those questions before I started my spiel about fatigue. So retrospectively apply my spiel to those questions. But I think, yes, to answer Nairobi's Demon's comment, I think there is. I can see George shaking his head saying, no way.
Absolutely no way. There's no way off a heavy game with 5-day break that you'd put a load in there. That you might have a
7-day break, though.
2 captains' runs, and that'll be the limit of it.
Well, I don't know. Well, I beg to differ. I think there is a chance that they did, but whatever the case is, that's my point. Whatever the case is, the fatigue was evident. I think there's every chance, George, that it was a 7-day break. So we had 7 days after the game against the Crows into this game. I think there is every chance that they put a heavy training block in. I'm not saying that was the cause of why we lost. I'm saying were fatigued. That was evident. But I think there's every chance that they were. And that's been our pattern with our mid-season bye. That's what they use the bye for. And this time, unlike other times we've had bye, we've got a proper 14-day break. And the whole way they use that 14-day break is to be able to put significant loads into the players and give them a week to taper and recover from the impact of those loadings. That's how, that's how Selwyn Griffith talked about the use of the byes when we interviewed him, Andy, a couple of seasons ago.
But that's what we're going into. So you'd be loading now, not last week.
I don't know. So
you've just played three of the three top 6 teams.
Yeah,
in really heavy games. That's the only reason.
Maybe not. But when we look at our numbers, these numbers are historically bad for us. So you might be right, George. It's sort of a moot point to a degree, but I would argue that it shouldn't be rejected out of hand. And so in the context of that, it's worth noting this is the pre-bye record of the teams that played in the opening round. I'm thinking there's 2 teams that have got the bye this week. So all of the teams that played in that opening round, which I think is a ridiculous concept, as I completely agree with Andrew Stafford, there's enough problems with the fixture without choosing to add another one, and giving this bye to clubs. Who knows what the impact of this is? Ridiculous. But having said that, the pre-bye record of the teams that played in the opening round is as follows. The D's, a 22-point loss to the Lions. The Lions, in the week before their bye, a 23-point loss to Freo. The Suns, in the week before their bye, they got touched up by the Dogs by 48 points. The Tigers, in the week before their bye, got beaten by the Eagles this week by 39 points. The Pies in the week before their bye led the Hawks at halftime by 38 points and completely stopped to a walk in the second half, only kicking 2 goals, none in the last. So they kicked 2 in the third and none in the last, to luckily scrape in by 2 points. They were really lucky to win that. Similarly, the Blues in the week in the game before their bye had a scrappy, lucky 5-point win over the Tigers and really should have lost that game. And they were really poor in that game. The Swans beat West Coast by 26 in their pre-game bye, and then the Giants were at the outlier. They thumped the Eagles. So basically any team who played a half-decent team in the week before the bye got beaten. And in all of those games, the losing team was the favourite going in.
But some of those byes were in the second or third week. Surely.
Yeah. So I would argue there's every chance that they look for that opportunity to put extra miles in it. But they may not. George may well be right, but whatever the case is, in this game it was clear that fatigue was a factor. How big a factor? Well, that's up for people to determine. But my point, I guess, that I'm trying to land on with the discussion about fatigue, if you don't factor in it at all, well, then you land on mentally weak and we, poorly coached, and our selections are.
You can also just play like shit.
Yeah, you can. That's right. You can. That's right.
Fatigue's 100% there.
Of course you can. Of course. But do you think
very off night?
Do you think we were cooked? Well, fatigued. It's the most common description of the game that I've seen so far is that we were fatigued.
Fatigued. Yeah. I agree.
I don't. So and also, you want to be clear. I want to be clear that I thought the Lions played fantastically. So they were awesome, and we weren't, and we made lots of mistakes. And I think they're reasonable criticisms, and we'll get to them during the show. In particular, our selection. The question about Oliver, having him in the team. He couldn't handle the ball with his right hand.
Couldn't handle it last week very well.
No, so I think they're all reasonable questions. So I don't want to allow the sort of discussion to make it sound like I'm making excuses or that's the sole reason. I just think it's important that it's factored in. So working backwards from the fitness or fatigue or whatever I'm going to end up calling it. So our transition from the back half, our points from defensive half actually weren't too bad. It was our season average is 30, and we scored 31 for this match, so that wasn't too bad. The Lions only scored 20 points from their back half. I thought was a positive, and 31 points for us. So we scored 11 more points from them from the back half, which I thought was pretty positive, but. Excuse me, we struggled to move the ball from the Lions' defensive half all game. 28 of the 47 scoring chains that we had, 28 of the 47 chains were intercepted by Brisbane. So well and truly over half of them were intercepted by Brisbane. We only got 6 going inside 50 from deep in their defensive 50 to our defensive 50 for just 1 goal. I mean, that's really terrible, and this sort of shows our struggles moving it, I think. The score sources from turnover, again, that wasn't too bad. We scored 30 points on turnover. They scored 34, so we're only down 4. I expected that to be much higher. The big one, of course, I've got an asterisk on the influence of and the importance of stoppages, but I'm increasingly thinking that it's back to being a key stat. It wasn't so much last year, not the number of stoppages, but the raw score from stoppages. We were down 25. So our season average from scores from stoppages is 26, and we could only manage 15 in this game. We conceded 40 points from stoppages, almost twice our season average that we concede of 19.2. 25 points the difference in stoppages. That's the game right there. We only lost by 22. That's a shocker. Yikes. And there'll be some discussion through the show as to what we could have done better, how we allowed that to happen. But that's a smashing. And I think I'm right in saying, I think I watched First Crack, and I think David King made the point that that's our biggest differential since 2018, but I might have got that wrong in terms of scores from stoppages. In terms of our contest, our contested possessions, this is really, I think, shows the match. Again, it's important, if you look at these stats through the lens of fatigue, then you get a maybe different feel for the game. But we were down 13 in contested possessions, which is an absolute bath for us. We always want to be positive in that. Our pressure ratings, again, were terrible, really. We came out all right, and this is another, I guess, evidence of fatigue if you're looking for it. 199 we were in our first quarter, which is fantastic. Remembering 200 is elite, but they were 227 in that first quarter. That's just crazy. They ended up averaging for the match 201. So, again, I can't emphasize, don't want to take anything away from Brisbane. They were fantastic. Their pressure was beyond elite for the match. So they went 227 in the first quarter, 191 in the second, 197 in the third, and 186 in the fourth for an average of 201, our average for the match. And keeping in mind, we began with 199 in the first quarter. Our average for the match was 168. So in the second quarter, our pressure fell to 160. The third quarter, coming out after halftime, normally is when you see a bounce in the pressure if you have had a low, was 151 in that third quarter. The differential for pressure points was 151 to 97, so 46, points more pressure Brisbane applied, which is really incredible. That's probably one of our worst performances under Goodwin, I suspect. 164 and 186 in the last. It's amazing that we were able to drag back that score, given the Lions continued to apply pretty decent pressure. Looking at defence, totally agree with what George says. Keeping them to, given their dominance in all the, just dominance in the eye and also all the numbers, I thought we did super well to keep them to 80 points. It was bang on, as I said, what the expected score was. So it wasn't as if, they were unlucky and kicked, 20 points that they should have got. So, that you can't help but be impressed with our defence. Particularly given, as George noted, we had one player, Oliver, who looked clueless back there and was playing one-handed. And two, they had Wowie, and I thought Wowie looked all at sea down back, and he came on as Salem's replacement. So we definitely lost something with Salo going off. Our other our intercepts were pretty good. We were +4 for intercepts. We took 4 more intercept marks than them as well, which is, that was last week. But this week was better. So this week we were +3 for intercepts, and we were +9 for intercept marks. So defensively, we were getting the ball back off them. We just weren't doing anything with it. Marks inside 50 surprised me a bit. We're only 3 down, 9 to 12. I mentioned the contest. They killed us in the contests. Tracker had only had 12 pressure acts in this match and 22 pressure points, almost half his season average of 39.7 pressure points. One of the questions that you read out, Andy, mentioned decision-making from Oliver, but I think you could see, I really felt at the ground that Track just wasn't making good decisions, and that's another fatigue-related issue often. And I thought the best example of it was he just did not see Fritter, and blazing away from outside 50 to kick it straight to Andrews was just a complete brain fade, wasn't it? And for me, it looked like he was cooked, to be honest. You were going to say, Andy?
No, he wasn't the only one either. But that kick was terrible, and he hesitated as well because
he hesitated
and
then shanked it.
He might have, well, that's the thing. Had he done a bullet, the other hits Fritsch or just lasers it towards goal earlier when there was no one back there, and it might have rolled through.
It was a shocker, just a poor decision. Our tackles, this is probably the worst stat you'll see all season. I would be shocked if this is not our worst number for the season. We were minus 29 for tackles. That is 53 we only managed for the game, 82 for them, which is just a shocker. And it's awesome for Brisbane. That's an amazing number for Brisbane, but that's the one that they would have put up on the whiteboard at the end and said, that's not good enough, fellas. So tackles were really poor. Ground ball gets, this continues to be a number. It's got an asterisk on it for me in terms of what sort of weighting you should put on it, because I think it partly reflects a sort of a different game plan. But nonetheless, we are 21 down for ground ball gets, which is a shocker. We're also 10 down for tackles inside 50. So, their pressure, their contest was so much better than ours. In terms of the clearances, we we were down in terms of raw numbers of clearances. We were dead even at 11 each from centre clearances. From stoppage clearances, they won 33 to our 24. So we were down 9, but really the problem was not the number of total, it was our scores. As I noted, they scored 40 points from around the ground stoppages to our measly 15. I think, as I said, that's our worst since 2018. This question will come up later, but just here's the number. Hit-outs, we were plus 31 for hit-outs, but only plus 5 for hit-outs to advantage. That's not going to, I reckon, of those hit-outs, if you had hit-outs to disadvantage, I can think off the top of my mind about 3 where they hit it straight down Rayner's throat. So that was, I reckon you could take them off the hit-outs to advantage column. Interestingly, our contested mark, and I'd note your point, George, that Maxi was really, I don't know whether he was down or they went to work on him, but 1 mark at three-quarter time is a shocker. So I was really surprised to see our contested marks were actually plus 4. So we took 18 last week and 14 this week. They only took 10 contested marks of the Lions. We had 9 marks inside 50 to their 12, which wasn't as bad as what it could be. So all in all, it was, I could go through any number of other numbers. The time in forward half was interesting. They smashed us in the first quarter, 66% to 34, and that's what it felt like. It felt like the ball lived in their half. In the second quarter, this really surprised me. It was back to 51 our way to 49. So if you'd asked me, but third quarter was 42-58. The last quarter, when I think they stopped to a walk, to be honest, was 64-36. So really, the damage was done in that first quarter. And just finally, thanks to Mr. Freeze, who posted the following. He credited someone. He ripped this off Reddit somewhere, which was this game, Stats versus Brisbane. This was on.
You've frozen up there, Bim. You froze up. Last thing you said was Stats versus Brisbane.
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yeah, now.
Testing. So this was interesting, I thought. So for Petrarca, Oliver, Viney, Stats versus Brisbane, round 5, 2024. Contested possessions, 7, 7, 12. Tackles, 1, 2, and 3. Disposals, 2018 and 23. Clearances, 2, 1, 7. So taking that first line, contested possession, collectively, those 3 players together. So collectively from 129 games as a trio, which is adjusted to account for the shortened 2020 quarters, was the equal 6th worst in that period in the last 129 games. Those 3 players, lowest since round 20, 2019 for those 3 players combined contested possessions. Tackles, those 3 players combined, the tackle numbers, was the equal 2nd worst in the last 129 games, the lowest since round 20, 2019. Geez, that was a bad game. I don't know what that one was, Andy. Who was that? Round 20,
I can't remember how that could be the Fremantle / Sydney games in Cairns. But what rounds was it while you doing?
Round 20, 2019. No, that was the year we missed. Disposals.
I was talking 2020.
So again, those three players, our engine room, Petrarca, Oliver and Viney, disposals was our equal 8th lowest in the last 129 games, the lowest since round 10 in 2019, which is, we had a shocking year, obviously. Didn't make the finals that year. And this is the big one, really, clearances.
That was against Richmond. I don't recall that game. It was late.
Yeah, it's gone from my memory too. Clearances, they only got, 10 clearances in total between the three of them in this game, which was the equal 10th lowest in the last 129 games and the lowest since round 5, 2021. And the final one, I'm not sure what sort of stock you put on AFL fantasy points, but that was the lowest since round 1, 2019 for those three players combined. Similarly, exactly the same for Supercoach. This one was interesting. Average time on ground was equal 12th lowest, the lowest since round 1, 2024, which isn't that interesting. One of the 20 goalless games, no goals in that game. So that's our engine room, Petrarca, Oliver and Viney. And it just, I think, sort of speaks to how down we were, or whatever the cause was, whether it was just poor performance or whether fatigue was a factor. We aren't going to win many games of football with those three players having such poor games.
Geez, going down memory lane of 2019, we really did have a terrible season that year. But
there were a whole bunch of other numbers that were as bad. Like the last time they were as bad was 2019. So on any measure, it was a woeful game, whatever the cause of it was.
That was a 2019 game on Thursday night. George, anything you want to say about those stats?
I'm trying to find something positive out of all of that, but I can't. Sorry. And 2019 is, let's put that away.
Yeah.
The positive is that we're not going to be fatigued like that every week. And so that's why I began with the discussion about the fatigue, because those numbers, if you look at them through the lens of fatigue, well, they're understandable. But if you don't, then, wow, that's just woeful performances from those players.
Let me close that tab in the browser. I don't want to see 2019 ever again. Well, let's get into our listener questions. Detox simply says, well played, Detox. Well played. Okay, let's get into Lazy says, is the excuse that opposition mids are sharking Max's taps overrated? How can anyone know his taps better than our mids? Dino Rover says, interested in your take on our apparent lack of clearance connection from centre bouncers. In centre bouncers, the idea that we play an extra behind the play can't apply, and arguably centre bounce clearances provide great opportunity for forwards because there is less forward congestion. Max has a 29% hit-outs to advantage stat, which is considered average. What is the stat for hit-outs to advantage from centre bouncers? Is this an area for improvement? Demon Dynasty says, hey gents, great work on these pods. Thank you for all your effort and time put in. No doubt you'll cover many aspects of the whys re Thursday night's result, including losing Salo, fatigue from the Adelaide travel, wins, 3 matches in 13, Clary's fingers, etc. Usually I'd try to answer this question myself, but I don't have the time this week to trawl through the replay, having only seen half of what happened from behind the goals. To see what I'm about to ask, you probably need to sit up in the bleachers of the Ponsford stand alongside Bin Man or score some behind-the-goal footage from Channel 7. So my question, what impact, if any, do you guys feel a usual +1 behind the ball had in the results, assuming we went with that all night, which would have left us down 1 at stoppage or more, assuming Brizzy brought an extra or maybe more at times. We got smashed at the around-the-ground stoppages, even with Max getting his fair share of hit-outs to advantage, and it started from the get-go with Rayner running rampant. At one stage, we were 6 to 8 goals down. Surely you don't maintain a +1 behind the ball in this situation. You need to even things up at the contest and start winning your fair share of first use and clearances and hopefully hit the scoreboard more often and get back in the game. Did this potentially stubborn adherence to structure cost us in any way on the night, or did Goodwin recognise it at some point, maybe too late, and even things up to try and cool Brizzy's jets? D Future says, I had a look at the replay, and unfortunately that came with Channel 7 commentary. With a constant stoppage game occurring, is that because they perfected the outnumber advantage that we usually give up? They can't play any better, and we certainly could. Only 22 points down, but one bad game that will give us many learnings. Think I had to have to go to the Gabba for the return match. Tarax Club says, thanks for the broadcast. I work remotely sometimes and typically listen the next day, dipping my toe very briefly into the swirling currents of the past game thread. Noted an astute observation that as well as being beaten on field, the team was also beaten off the field. It appears that the Lions coaching panel and players have done their homework. Despite our reputation as having premium on ballers and a champion ruckman, the impotence of our performance at centre bounces and around the ground stoppages was plain to see. On the couch will probably have the high-tech vision and the gee-whiz explanations. To put it simply, Max was barricaded by the Lions mids at every opportunity. The Demons mids were left riding around the outside, unable to get first hands on the ball. Max Gawn's statistical performance in a losing side was lauded by many, but is it just a finger in the dike? I know there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to unpack here. And a lot of people had a lot to say about the stoppages, the clearances, the opposition sharking Max. B-Man, does anything in the stats tell you about our performance in the middle and the stoppages, including the numbers around the stoppages? Do you have any ideas? I know you do. Did you replay it? Watch the replay?
No, I haven't. I have to say I haven't watched the replay, and I probably won't if I'm being honest. Well, we were down 25, so the numbers spoke for themselves. The margin was 22.
About our work at the stoppages in terms of numbers.
We kept. It's an interesting.
And did we?
There's another question. There's another question coming up that sort of speaks to this as well, and it speaks to the philosophy of Goodwin. Is that yes, we kept our normal structure. Yes, we did. We had one less at stoppages. I think it frustrates fans so much, and you said it. We didn't do anything. We didn't change anything up, and it was doubly frustrating because it looked like at one point, we were hitting it. Maxie was hitting it direct to Cam Rayner. It seemed like for the first half.
Yeah,
they don't do it.
I don't think they were sharking it. I think he tapped it straight down to them.
Yeah, there was
obviously.
There was another point. I wonder whether they actually got the jumpers confused. There was another one where I think it was Track again, who seemed to have a brain fade and tried to take a screamer over Sparrow, who was clearly the player to market. So I don't know. Maybe they just got confused with all of the fatigue and they mixed up the. But yes, so the short answer is they can completely and utterly keep the same structure. They did. Goodwin talked about some of the changes they made at during the third quarter that George touched on, and one of which was Oliver to the back half, which was hardly the most successful trial. Rivers had 8 centre bounce attendances, so he played a lot more middle time. I think Salo going out really threw them a spanner in the works. Oliver. It's a good question as to whether he should have played because he had almost zero effect. He was tagging. I saw at one point Sparrow went to kneel and was looking to lock him down, but they don't. It's sort of another hallmark of Goodwin's coaching. We've talked about this a lot over the last 3 years. I would love to talk to Goodwin about this, but I'm convinced that he has a philosophy that you do not change your system because it's not about winning this game. It's about winning the flag. I'm convinced this has been a criticism of him ever since he started coaching, and in particular from the 21 season on. He does not change our systems, even when we're getting beaten. Like he might make some changes, but not to the system, not to the structure. And I think the philosophy is that in the heat of battle, in a preliminary final, instinctively players need to trust the system, and that is eroded. That trust is eroded is that you pick a match and you start making wholesale changes to the system. Now, people can have their individual views on that philosophy. I think it's his philosophy, and again, I've spoken about Goodwin a lot this season, but he would point to the scoreboard. No team has won more games of football than us since the start of the 21 season. That's just a fact. And so he would point to the system being critical. He is a systems coach, and maybe some people don't like the extent to which he emphasises system, but it's core to our system is one less at the stoppage and one behind the ball. As George said, we did brilliantly to keep them to 80 points. We do not keep them to 80 points if we bring an extra to the stoppage. So your defensive system gets eroded if you decide to bring someone up extra to the stoppage, and maybe we concede 110 points. So I just don't think it's I think it's a philosophical thing from Goody. He doesn't make anything but tinkering around, but he doesn't change the system.
George?
Just going back to Max, like I said, I don't think Max had all that great a game. I counted 3 goals that resulted in chains to Brisbane. 3 hit-outs that went directly to a Brisbane player that resulted in goals. I lost count of the number of times that I was screaming at the match, he's hit it the wrong way again. He kept hitting the Brisbane played a number of players on the outside, usually packed together, and Max kept hitting them directly to those Brisbane players. It really wasn't a good look. You can have all the hit-outs in the world if they're going to the opposition. They weren't sharking them, because if they were sharking them, there would have been Melbourne players there. So, I think that skews your statistics dramatically, skews your stoppage statistics dramatically. Again, he was doing it all on his own. It's not surprising. He was tired. He was trying to hit the ball too far a lot of times. Hit it 20 metres forward. Well, that's no good, because that just puts it into the path of the defenders.
I think he was getting frustrated that they were all the things, so he just wanted to clear it from the stoppage.
Yeah, but all he was doing was, like I said, was putting it into the path of the defenders, who then probably went down the other end, so to speak. So, look, it was a bad game all round for that. The change in the game style didn't occur until, like I said, 10 minutes in the third quarter. What we did was actually move the wingers up a little bit further to stop their chip and kick type game, where they were just keeping the possessions. That stopped the rot, because they were moving the ball basically the whole length of the ground without a single Melbourne player touching it. It wasn't surprising that they were getting it into their forward line so freely and easily. But it wasn't the Danahers and Hipwoods who were scoring the goals. It was their smalls who were doing all the damage.
As it always is.
As it always is, yeah. I'm not worried about that. But, look, our guys couldn't run. Apart from the fatigue, I think losing Salem, and we'll talk about it shortly, had a dramatic effect, not just from losing Salem, but it was the flow-on effects from that that upset the defensive side of things, that it upset the attacking mode from the defensive lines, which we depend on. When you've got Oliver and Woden down there, and you've taken Salem and you've taken Rivers out of the half-back line, it's not surprising that things sort of turned a bit turkey.
And I think you make a good point about Salo. The other thing is about how early he came off. I think it was in the first 2 or 3 minutes that he came off. Yep. And it did 2 things. One, it left us a player down on rotations, obviously, but even though we had the sub. But Wowie, I don't think, had a great game. No. And so he was exposed for the entire match in some respects, exposed maybe a bit tough, but we were definitely down. They would have hoped to bring on, Wowie as a runner to replace someone like a Windsor or, not a halfback flanker. And it's a specialist position. It really is a specialist.
Or a mid-rotation as well.
Yeah, exactly. Or a mid-rotation, because, it's a big ask to send a player back, not just to play halfback flank, but to, be a role player in such a strong system. So I think you're spot on in terms of how well they did just to manage that scoreline to 80 points. It's a really good point, George. I think you're right that they did adjust that system in terms of pushing up and playing a bit more of a normal Melbourne match of more contests and more forward half footy. And we talked last week about them setting the defence back in order to help us transition the ball. Well, the opposite happened in the first quarter, is that it allowed them to tic-tac the ball, because, as you said, we didn't have the run in our legs to cover that. We've talked about it all the time, is that to do that all-team defensive running requires an enormous amount of running from all players, and to run up and to sort of do that wave running to get across. And we just didn't have that ability, and they ran it up the ground super easy. As I've talked about, I could see where I sit the information that's shown the players, and one of the headings on the player that was the players on the bench this week was "make them run," and it made me laugh, because I think they must have hacked Brisbane's board, because making them run wasn't working for us, I'm afraid. And the more they ran, the more they ran away from us.
at the break of Gorn says, Brisbane have our measure and have proven the last 3 times we've played them that they can move the ball easily through our team defence. I'd like to know what the panel think of how we can combat this if we play them in finals. I don't think it's as simple as winning more clearances and taking territory. Their ability to transition deep out of our defence, especially via kick-ins, through to their forward half was ultra impressive, and I don't know if we have an answer to that. KLV adds, hey guys, thanks for the pod. Listen every week and maybe not quite till the end every time. Just read that Brisbane had a specific plan to pierce through our defence by forcing us to defend the short lead-ups and therefore opening up their forward 50. This sounds too simplistic to explain our woeful performance. What do you think? Should we be worried? Buck Naked says, if we have been developing a red and blue print, would the team like to consider the blue and red print? That is there a blueprint for how to beat the Ds? Based on what you have seen so far, was this loss situational or systematic? What do we need to do to overcome these losses becoming more common? So, George, should we be worried that this is the red and blue or the blue and red print to defeat us?
I think Brisbane had a plan which worked on the night for the circumstances that they were presented with. Normally they wouldn't get away with what they got away with in this game, and I wouldn't be worried about it. If that's the way that they think they're going to beat us the next game, I think they might be in for a bit of a surprise. There were other reasons that were more critical to the outcome for why we lost this game rather than they won it. So don't expect to see too much of a change. I certainly don't expect to see a change from our perspective. Leave them wondering what they've got to do to beat us the next time when we're fully fit and fully capable and able and not fatigued.
Well, I'll tell you, here's the blue and red print to beat us. They, as I noted, they had 13 more contested possessions than us. Their pressure rating was above 200 for the match, 32 points more pressure rating than us, and smashed us for tackles, had 29 more tackles. If we're going to lose every time, every match that we have numbers looking like that, we're going to lose. So if other coaches happening to be listening to this show beat Melbourne by 30-odd tackles, beat us by 10 to 15 contested possessions, and you'll go a long way to beating any team, but also the Ds. Just on the pressure numbers, it's a bit of I don't know what, it's either a positive. In one respect, it's a positive, but it's also a bit of a damning stat. The Colt, he was our 4th highest pressure rated with 17 acts for 39 points. And if you're asking a young fella in his first game to be in our top 5 players applying pressure, that's struggle town a little bit for the rest of the senior players.
And the fact that we played Colt in, at a centre bounce attendance, tells you how desperate we were at that particular point in the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
We didn't have a question about Colt, but how did you think he went? Considering it, I mean, it's a tough game to play your debut, especially the way the team played. But what did you think of?
I think we've got a question about other young players in there as well, and I think, from Colt's perspective, he showed he's got that poise to be able to play at AFL. It was a really hard ask. Like you throw him into the midfield against the likes of Rayner and Neil and co, playing a lot and expected to hold your own. It was a pretty hard ask for him, but he did all right. He didn't fluff up anything. He wasn't overwhelmed. I'm equally as impressed with Windsor. On the wing.
Me too. He did a couple of things again. Each week he does a couple of things that I go, right, he's a serious player.
Yeah, exactly. He's not going anywhere. People who think he's going to be dropped out of the side for because he's only played those half a dozen games now. He's going to be around for a while. He doesn't seem to be affected. Nobody seems to be able to catch him.
No, he's got
to smash him into the ground or things like that. And he's got that innate ability to be able to weave his way through situations that he really shouldn't escape from, but he does. Colt was fantastic. Windsor was fantastic. Wowie was lost again, I think, because of what he was expected to do. not surprising. It wasn't his role in the first place. At least Colt's been playing, only a couple of games down at Casey, playing midfield type roles on a part-time basis as well. But he certainly stood up when needed.
And it is super impressive that he was our fourth highest pressure player, which in his, that's got to be a good thing in your first game of AFL footy. Pity he couldn't get a goal. He made a couple of mistakes, I thought, actually, which could have cost us a goal. But he's got energy. It'd be interesting to see what happens next week. Just on the Lions is that model isn't, they've been playing that model for a long time, that chip and moving it up forward. And we've taken that on board. We've taken that style. That's what we did against the Hawks a bit more dramatically because we tried to spread the ground. The Saints did the same thing against the Giants on the weekend just gone. That idea of sort of short lead up kicks on the 45, that's probably one of the major ways the sort of they transition the ball, and one of their major strengths, the Lions, that is. For me, though, our biggest weakness against them continues to be, is those medium forwards that I'm talking. I've talked a lot about McCluggage and McCarthy, and I thought we were reasonable against them, but again, Salem going out of that lineup threw a spanner in the works because Wowie had to go fill that role. At one point, it was Wowie and Oliver back there. Oliver was on Lincoln McCarthy at one stage and sort of didn't have the defensive nous to go with him. Those players, Cameron had something like 10 score involvements, I think. They just hurt us. I think that's really one of their really big strengths is those mid-sized players, and they're a really good side, Lions.
I watched McCarthy before the game doing his practice shots from left boot, right boot, from the boundary, in front, everywhere. Every single shot that he did went straight through the middle. It was very, a really skilled player, and you put him in front of the goals, he's going to score goals. Can't do anything. Yeah.
And on the night, Judd McVie had his lowest rate game for the season by a mile, only 3.3. Blake Howes similarly, not his lowest, but 5.2. So they're the players that they're the ones taking those mid-sized players, mid-sized forwards. We always struggle to cover them, and I think it's it's an advantage they have over us. That's for sure.
Talking about Salem, Oh My D's says, losing Salem so early in the game was a critical factor to our demise on Thursday, in my opinion. To lose a key experienced distributor off halfback and someone who could have taken midfield minutes to give our mids a chop out really hurts us. I'd love the panel's thoughts on the significance of losing Salem and how we can cover his absence moving forward. So, George, the hits to our small defenders and our midfield support keep coming. Losing Gus, then Bowie, Hall, and not having Pickett plays cameo in the middle this week. Salem going down earlier put a spanner in the way that we use Salem, and not to mention losing an elite pool user. So we've talked about the significant loss that it was on Thursday night, but I guess we can talk about now, how do we cover his absence, because he will probably be out for 21 days, probably 4 weeks or something.
Yeah. I don't think you can replace him. He's one of those players that with his ability to read the play but also deliver the ball, he's a major distributor. Fortunately, we've got Rivers that's also slipped into that role as well. So at least we've got one more there. But just as equally, losing Salem is just another midfield rotation, as was pointed out. We we had him in the practice games going through there because we didn't know whether Oliver was going to play or not. And in this circumstance, we didn't have Oliver effectively in the middle. No Salem to go into the middle. It was a bit of a disaster all round. That's just sheer and utter bad luck as it turns out. Watching the Casey game, I think the interesting thing will be what they do with Turner. I wouldn't be surprised if Turner doesn't either come into the forward line or the back line. He had a fantastic game down there, and
where did he play against Casey?
He played forward and back. He played one. So he's a very versatile player.
He's athletic enough to take a medium, isn't he? He could play.
Yeah, he is. Oh yeah. He certainly can. Reads the play very well.
Yeah.
But they're obviously also trying him out as forward. as well. And I wouldn't be surprised, if for example, Ben, we'll talk about this later, but if Ben Brown needs another week off, I wouldn't be surprised to see Turner go up forward as another option. But
that's huge that he's up and running, because
that's great. Yeah,
easy to forget. I think a good indication of how Goody and the coaching staff rate players is when they get him in. And he played his first game of footy 2 years ago, didn't he?
That's right. Yeah, then he got injured.
Got his jaw broken just before half time.
Yep.
That's a pretty solid indication of how highly they rate him. And he's got good goal. He reads the ball super well. I'm thinking in time he'll be our lever replacement, because he's good one-on-one and he zones off. He's got good hands. I reckon he's going to be a real good player. And so to have him available, he might well be a really good in for Salo. But it's a bit, Andy, this year's forward line travails is our halfback flankers, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah.
So because Bowie's still 4 to 6 weeks away according to the injury list.
Yep.
And what was Salem's? I didn't even catch the.
It's
3 to 4 weeks hamstring. So
it's hammy, is it?
Yeah.
I was really at the ground because I watched him. I happened to have the binoculars on him when he got hurt, and I thought for all the world he was hurt seriously. And a fella in front of me said that he'd done his foot. And I'm thinking, oh Christ, another foot injury. So I was pleased to hear that it was a hamstring.
Garbo says Goodwin's refusal to adjust when things aren't going our way. It seemed to be obvious to me due to the selection of several players who seemed to be unable to play the zone defence tonight. The Lions were able to repeatedly move the ball from defensive 50 to attacking 50 without us being able to get a hand on it, putting our defence under enormous pressure. Why didn't we switch to more man-on-man defence that would have shut down the play? I have no idea. This was also evident in the last 2 games, but the wins papered over those cracks. Big man, you said that Goody doesn't, we're playing to win a grand final. We're playing every game. So, but should we have switched to a man-on-man defence a bit earlier when our zone defence, which admittedly has worked for us, was being carved up? Should we have maybe adjusted something?
Well, as we've talked about, our defence wasn't the issue. We kept them to 80 points. So why?
But the ball was getting through.
Well,
to the defence, our defence repelled.
Well, still, we kept them to 80 points. So whether they should have done, Garbo's right, absolutely right, is that he made limited moves. George is correct. They did actually push up. That's a good call. And compress the ground a bit more and play in that sort of more contested style that has been more familiar under Goody. They made the change to Oliver to the halfback flank, though that's no rocket science one. It's a bit like moving him around. It goes to my comment before. I think that it's just not Goodwin's style. I just think he places an emphasis on the system above all, almost, and definitely not going to man on man. I mean, the biggest part of our game plan, or our most consistent part of our game plan and method, is our zone all-team defense and our zone defense. Where it's whether they could even be effective going to a man-on-man. I know Port did the other week, and maybe some teams practice it, but if they never practice at all moving from a zone to a man-on-man, I know in basketball teams do that all the time, don't they, George? But the ones that don't practice it are all at sea, in my experience, when they try to make that switch in game.
I wouldn't call it a need for a man-on-man. That's completely different game style. I would have thought, to use the basketball analogies, a half-court press. Which is what we ultimately did by moving those wingers in particular a bit further up to keep the pressure up there. But the zone defence stayed as is, as it should. So don't expect to see any changes there. I think the other thing that everybody blames Goody. I think the loss of Uze as a tactician might be proving to be critical. He's the one who would have made that call a bit earlier, I suspect. Watching the way he's coached Richmond when they've been in some really dire situations has been quite remarkable. I think they were 10 goals down in one game, and they came back by simple positional moves. So, I think Uze's his loss as a tactician might be detrimental to us, but Anyhow, there are far greater other reasons in this game for where we finished up.
And there's no question that Goody isn't Ross Lyon, who already this season at halftime has made some radical changes and been lauded for it, including this game. But it's worth noting that they didn't win this game on the weekend despite his genius moves at halftime. It's a good question from Garbo, and a lot of people have been critical about Goodwin. I just think, as I said before, it's part of his philosophy of coaching. And it's also worth noting in that context that he is on the bench and the interchange player, so he can't see the full ground. So George's point's a good one around, what is the influence or the role of the people up the top in the box looking down. Uze and him, how many seasons was Uze at the D's? 3?
2021 he came.
So 3 seasons. So they would have built up a relationship. I think the bigger example would be the stoppages. Why not throw an extra? He has done that at times, but very infrequently, and he didn't do it on the weekend. For me, I can't remember if there's a question about this, Andy, so apologies if there is. It's hard to work out the thinking behind, for me, why would you select Oliver? He was clearly hampered by his hand. Looking at him through the binoculars coming off, he looked super cooked. He looked more cooked than every other player on the ground. He didn't really add much. If his hand is that bad, maybe another week would have been good. And you have Laurie, who got something like 20 tackles or something, I read, against Casey, who's raring to go. For me, that's one of the queries that I have about if they are fatigued, and we can accept that, there's a fair level of fatigue right across the team. One of the recurring questions every year is, well, why not bring in a Laurie? I'm not sure who else might have come up from the.
It's pretty slim.
Yeah,
because we bought Colt up.
Yeah, we brought Colt up. I mean, well, Laurie certainly, he's fit and raring. Yeah. I'm not sure where Spargs is. He didn't play at Casey, did he?
Spargs has disappeared off the face of the earth.
So
he keeps getting every week. He's still 4 weeks away.
So maybe it was only Laurie that could have come up, but you would have thought that he would have added more, at least in terms of freshness and fatigue, than Oliver, because Oliver really didn't.
Considering Oliver's went into surgery the day after, and that was planned. And I'm not sure if we said it on last week's podcast or the week before, that we'd probably prefer Oliver playing at 80% than anyone else at 100%.
Yeah, well,
clear that he's hampered by this hand injury, as well as maybe because of having the interrupted preseason that it's well documented that he didn't have the same preseason as everyone else. He might be cooked. I don't know. What do you?
Well, you get an argument from me that 80% of Clary is probably better than 100% of Laurie, but he was about 20%. So I reckon 20% of Clary is less than 100% of Laurie.
Yeah, that's the difficulty that the selection committee faced, and I think Laurie was emergency for both games in Adelaide, so effectively he hasn't played for 3 weeks.
Yeah, well, there was last week. There was no Casey game. There was one this week, but there is none next week as well.
So
just a point you mentioned before, while I think of it, George, is the other factor in this same conversation about could have they brought other players in with fresher legs. Again, this is something that Goodwin doesn't do, does it? We have this same conversation every year when we're around the bye period, when we're looking fatigued. We have this conversation about, well, shouldn't have they rested player X? But Van Rueing, he looked exhausted in this match and basically gave no real chop out to Maxi. Maxi did 90% of the rucking, and he was pretty ineffective. Demon Dynasty in the chat room notes that he wasn't offering any pressure up forward either. So, you're right, George, with what you said before about Maxi. He was labouring all game, and he didn't get much help. No one else did any other ruck other than Van Rueing and Gawn. And Van Rueing, I thought, he's not a good game, did he? Couldn't clunk him. He looked exhausted. So maybe a Varel coming in would have been, better than running Van Rueing into the ground. Or
I think though that Van Rueing was also mismanaged in this game in terms of rotations. He'd start on the bench while Max was rucking. Then they'd throw him into the ruck and then throw him down forward. I would have thought a sensible thing to do would be to start him down forward before you put it, then put him into the ruck and then give him a break.
After the ruck, he's probably exhausted.
He's absolutely exhausted. It's not surprising, to me at least, that he couldn't mark. He's been smashed in the middle, and then you expect him to take marks up the forward line. So, I wasn't impressed with that, with the way he was being rotated through there during the game. But at the end of the day, he's 20. If we forget. And then we're expecting him to do the rucking role as well as playing full forward. He's 20 years of age. We'll talk about Varel a bit further on because I think we might see a bit of him as well.
We do have a caller on the line. Welcome to the Demonland podcast. Who am I talking to?
Evening, gents. This is Red Leaf 23.
Hey, mate. How are you going?
I'm well, thanks. Boys, great pod as always. I just thought I'd chime in just quickly. It's a bit of a bugbear at the minute for me. I just wanted to sort of get your thoughts on Bailey Fritsch watch lately. I reckon I called maybe a week ago, maybe a couple of weeks back, in regard to the fact that he's been doing a few things, or maybe there's been a lack of some team-oriented stuff that him as a senior player, I think, should be better with. Now, he's obviously our most clinical player in the forward 50. So he's very capable and he's paid to kick those goals. However, I just think that because he's a senior player, you've got to be able to celebrate people in better positions and give them an opportunity to score if they are in fact in better positions. And just again against the Lions, I think it was late in the fourth, he swung on his left, and if he had looked up, and I'm sure he did see them, there were a couple of options on that. I think as a senior player, he's got to set the example in regard to that. So I don't know if it's just something that's front of mind. He's clinical, he kicks goals, he can do a lot of things that a lot of players can't. But he's also only playing probably 10 or 15 minutes of footy a game. And even the games that he's done well, it's literally been 4, 5, 6 minutes. So I just think there's so much more scope for Bailey. And you look at guys like Jeremy Cameron. I mean, he's obviously an absolute stunning player, but why couldn't Fritsch do or play in the way Jeremy Cameron does? Because I think he's got the skill set. So I just wanted to see your thoughts.
B-Man, did you want to take that?
Yeah, it's a fair critique. I was just looking at his numbers. It's pretty surprising. He only had 5 possessions. So score involvements, 4 of his 5 possessions were score involvement. That's a tick. 1 goal assist. But 5 disposals isn't such a great game. And I've got a feeling Redlegs, was it maybe only a couple of disposals at halftime? It's not that it matters when you only get 5, I guess. He's had a couple of...
He only had about a couple, like to three-quarter time. I'm pretty sure the start of the last he had 2 or 3 at the most.
Yeah, and he had no tackles, which is something that's been a knock on him. Not so much last year. He really improved in his defensive work, but there's been a couple of games now where he hasn't had, he's been overlooked a bit, as you note, by the fact he's scoring goals, particularly with no Cozzy in that side. He was a big factor, I think, in terms of our lack of pressure. It really means that the Van Ruin and Fritter have to lift their ratings, and no tackles is poor, I think. 5 disposals is equally poor as well. And sometimes, I think when he's not playing well, his body language can be a bit off. I was worried right from the beginning. He had a foot injury last year. I don't think he's ever quite got back to his best since then. But I think it's reasonable criticism.
Anything else, Redlegs?
No, guys, that's pretty much it. I think if you look at the 6 games we've played, you definitely take that 4-2 at the start of the season, considering everything of the last sort of 6, 8, 10 months. So I think you'd probably take that and rest up and start again against the Tigers and Anzac Eve and go from there.
Agree, 6-2. That's what we want to get to, 6-2.
Yep, absolutely, boys. So, yeah, thanks for the insight, lads. And, I'll be enjoying the rest of the pod.
All right. Thank you very much, Redlegs 23. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all your contributions with your voicemails, your calls, and your work on Demonland. Cheers.
No problems, boys. Thanks, lads. Ta.
Well, to get to that 6-2, we've got to beat Richmond. The injuries depleted Richmond, and we'll talk more about that game a bit later. But then we've got two very, very tough games. We've got Geelong at the G and Carlton at the G. So they're going to be the two games we really need to win those. And we'll talk about them in the coming weeks. So let's get on to the next one. Watson11 says, interested to get the thoughts on the new attacking game plan. B-Man has mentioned in earlier pods that he thinks Goody will have an early season game plan and then another for later. Last year, we also started the season taking lots of risks from the defensive half. In fact, at the end of round 9 in 2023, we were number one for scoring and number one for scoring from defensive half. 40 points a game compared to 30 points a game this year. Last year, following consecutive losses to Port and Freo, we changed it up in round 10, resulting in slow, safe ball movement and inside 50 bombing to pockets to set up repeat entries. It had an immediate effect when we restricted Carlton to 44 points. Can B-Man elaborate on what he thinks the other game plan will be and when it will happen? I personally would like to see us persevere with the attacking brand all season and wear the setbacks. So, B-Man, any thoughts on what Watson11 said and our ball movement?
I think it's a great point about how attacking we were in the first third of last season. It's so easy to forget. The narrative is under Goodwin Demons play boring football. We're the highest scoring side at round 9 by a mile, I think. We're maybe not by a mile, but we were up there. And by the end of the season, only 2 teams had scored more than us. I'm pretty right in saying at the end of the season.
Yeah, Adelaide was one of them.
Yeah, Adelaide was one, and the Pies by a handful of points. So we're third or fourth. So, but Watson11's point's exactly right. In the first third of the season, we racked up plus 100 points at least twice, maybe 3 times in the first 8 games. We were attacking last season, and I talked about it on the pod. My sense is that we will keep persevering with it. My idea about what the 2 game plans is essentially that come high pressure games and come finals is that all teams will revert back to the sort of model that Melbourne has basically sort of leveraged off off the Tigers. High pressure, high contest, those 2 things that I've said in the red and blueprint, the defence, pressure, contest. So contest and defence. So come finals, last year, all the talk was about through the season was about Collingwood's how attacking they were off the halfback flank. Now, this is off the top of my head, but something like their last 9 games, Collingwood, they didn't break 90 points. Maybe once or twice there was over that. I talked about the finals last year. Only Brisbane and the Giants scored more than 100 points in the finals last year. I'm pretty right in saying. All the rest of the games turn into what finals always turn into, which is what I think we'll end up going back to. We'll still look, obviously, to transition it. I think that's going to be a feature right through the season. But come the big games, come the end of the season, come finals, that model's got a big flaw in it. And the flaw in it is that if you put enough pressure on the opposition, those neat little kicks into the corridor get turned over and you get scored against and everyone gets into their shells. It happens every single season. Come finals, the scores go down and it becomes really about like a rugby game where contest is king, pressure is king, tackling is king, and that's what we'll revert to. I think I talked about this earlier in the season. I think part of the logic of this game plan is that it's not as physically taxing. You cannot. We found out in 2022 playing that sort of high press model that George was talking about, where you create density, where it's forward half football, where it's those indicators that I've talked about that were key indicators for us last year, which is time in forward half, number of inside 50s, contested possessions. They will become key indicators again as we head towards the finals. But if you play like that all season, we won't get to finals in any good shape. And I think that's what happened to us in 2022. We tried to play that way the whole season. And come finals, we were we talk about being cooked in this game. We were completely cooked. We were exhausted physically. I remember George talking about how many players at the final training before the finals kicked off in 22 were wearing bandages. It was like a civil war room. There was bandages everywhere. Remember that, George, in terms of the lead into the 22 finals. So I think this way of playing is part of the strategy is to get to the finals not too banged up. If you can see in the pressure numbers, if you're playing open football and you're using the width of the MCG and you're kicking to leading players, the pressure numbers go down, and so do the physical contests. There's less hits, there's less stoppages, there's less concussions, there's less injuries, essentially less banged up players. So the short answer is I think that we'll continue to persevere with this model. But as we approach the finals, Goody's already talked about it. He's already put it on the table, is that we can't play the whole season, allowing the opposition to get 60% inside 50s. We saw what happened on the weekend last Thursday, I should say, when that happens. So I think as we approach the finals, we'll head back to a more contested model that is more focused on territory and get time in forward half. Hopefully, though, we'll keep key elements of this transition model. But it has to be said that, there were some numbers put out during the week that I read on Demonland that were quoted from Champion Data from Daniel Hoyne that sort of indicated we were sort of middle to bottom on a number of key statistical areas, and they all came to bear in this match just gone. So, including our transition from the back half, I think we're 15th or something from transition from the back half. If we want to be a transition team, we want to be up in the top 5. So I think we will persevere with that model, but as we approach finals, we'll become more territory focused, more inside 50s, and much bigger emphasis on winning contested possessions.
MPC says, I think for the first time in quite a few years, we are seeing a lack of depth in our team. Losing Salem so early in the game disrupted our team defence, which was left to Woden to fill alongside Howes and McVie. Previous years, we would have had Brayshaw to fold back or the super sub Smith and adjust things around them. In the midfield, Oliver looked injured, and I wonder if we played him because we don't have ready-made replacements like Jordan or Dunstan this year. I also fear for Gawn as he's getting older and the seasons seem to be getting longer. We don't have a real backup. Rue is great, but still so young and is a forward, not a ruck. Maybe Fullerton. I miss Dogger. Up forward, Brown looks tired, and my guess is the club would have planned a rest for him by now, but maybe we don't have anyone to replace him with. Also, maybe Fullerton, Jefferson. For the Smalls, Colt debuted and looked a bit out of his depth in previous years. He would not have got a run in his first year, and he would have developed a Casey. We would have had the likes of Bedford ready to go, or Spargo if he wasn't injured. After the bye, it will be interesting to see what our team looks like without Salem, Bowie or Hoare. Previous years, we would have had Hibbert or Smith as an option, or Brayshaw to move back. This year, it seems a bit light on. Hopefully, Disco gets a good run at it. And if Oliver is still not quite right, who do we replace him with? I like the idea of Cozzy, Rivers and Nibbler having stints in the midfield, but they are different players to Oliver, and that leaves a gap in other parts of the field. Will be a good test of our depth over the next month or so. Interested to get your thoughts on this. Thanks for the podcast. I enjoy it each week. Delightful Play says, to chime in alongside the other comments and questions around depth, with Gus retired, it was insightfully noted on the podcast earlier in the season that we have a few players taking on aspects of Gus's versatile role in the midfield/back. For example, Salem playing more midfield minutes and Bowie being a clever strategic kick from the half-back. This seems to have worked well. For our first few games, we've had quite a bit of movement in the team due to injuries. Petty, Hoare, May, Bowie, and now Salem, which has made it hard week to week to gain cohesion and required us to blood some young ones, admittedly all doing a great job. Our depth held up until this last game, really. Now, after pushing a time frame of 4 games in 19 days, including some hard-fought games, it's unsurprising that players young and old, and some understandably sore players like May, Brown, and Oliver, had no energy in this game. The 12-day break should help us greatly, but even so, it feels like that's a Band-Aid fix for what is a long season remaining. All up, I'm not worried about dropping the Lions game, but do worry that in the long run this season, we're going to find it hard to keep the cavalry for success. Please help me find some optimism, guys. Thanks also for your hard work and wonderful podcast. As always, I've unfortunately had to string a lot of late nights at work in the past month, but each week it's a joy to listen to the pod hot off the press. Demonstrative says some thoughts in relation to the inexperience of the team and list depth. Windsor, Colt, Howes, Wowie, Chandler, McVie and JVR all debuted playing at senior level in the last 2 seasons. That is higher than 25% of the team's selected team. Chandler being the exception. From memory, played 9 games mostly as a sub. Garbo says the selection of players who are not fit and able to play their role, Oliver and Ben Brown, and some who are horribly out of form for one reason or another, Billings, JVR, Petty, some combination of these guys should not have been on the field tonight. George, are you at all worried about our depth?
Of course I'm worried, and so is every coach in the AFL. You've only got to look at what's happened to Richmond in the last couple of weeks with the players that they're missing and the consequences of, particularly this week, losing to the Eagles quite substantially. We're holding up at the moment, same as I said, a lot of coaches in the AFL. I'm sure we would have wanted to give Ben Brown a break. The fact is, we haven't got anybody else available at the moment. There is, we might have an option in Turner coming in from the sounds of things. Jefferson isn't producing as early as perhaps what we expected, and he'll may take time to get to the necessary levels. The other problem we've got is the players that we've got who can come up aren't the players that we need at the moment. We'd love to have another mid. Well, we've got Laurie probably is the only one down at Casey. Seston maybe, but he's not quite. He needs to take another step up.
It's the same deal for AMW.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The players that we need to take the step up, the opportunities are there, just aren't there at all. And I've found it surprising that Tolstrup and even Windsor have come straight into the side. I was expecting them to come in much later in the season, but because of injuries, we've been forced to move those. They're obviously very quality players into the side at this stage. But
6-7 and Tolstrup was 13, wasn't he? It just goes to show the benefit of really getting those high picks in. Cozzy was the same. He was in his first season, and ditto for Jackson. So
exactly.
Our first rounders.
Rivers played a number of games in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But
just George, before you go on, you talked about Richmond, and they've got a lot of injuries. It's well documented, and I think they've. And I'll say it a bit later. I've got for our preview. I think they only had 7 players in their reserves team, but Champion Data 6. Champion Data's tally of games lost from best 22 players to injury this season has Richmond with 33 games lost, followed by Melbourne 29. So we're only 4 off Richmond, who are decimated in terms of best 22. So we're in a similar boat to them. It might not seem it, but
I think the quality might be best 22, but I think Richmond's situation is that the top 6 are missing. So or they've got one. I think there's only one player at Richmond who would fall outside that fall in that side that top 6.
Including the poor buggers losing one of their. Is it Gibbs? Like he was a top 5 pick, wasn't he? Or top 10?
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd echo totally what George just said in terms of depth. All teams struggling with depth, and there just isn't that many elite footballers around. And cast your mind forward to when there's a Tasmanian team. It's going to put pressure on all clubs' depth. It's where I talked about fatigue, but really injury is such a critical factor. The reality is we've had, as you just noted, Andy, I think in particular Bowser and Melksham have hit us. So I think that injuries is going to be is always a huge factor. It's been a factor for us already. It's impacting our back line now with Salem out as well as Bowser. That's doubling down on that issue. So luck plays a massive factor. A lot of those injuries at Richmond, to be fair, not to be fair, but have just been unlucky. You couldn't say that they were, from poor preparation or whatever. They were just dead unlucky, I think. So I have the same concern and around depth. But as George points out, I think 17 other clubs have exactly the same concern.
Just on the Melksham or the McAdam, we're really missing that position, I think, in our forward line.
Especially when you take a Cozzy out of it.
Yeah, that's right. And it really showed up in this match, actually, because we had no one. Melksham would have taken Andrews. And he did his normal killing us intercept. We had no one really that was able to just play a defensive role on Andrews. And at one point, Lever was playing on Cameron. And so, that I know that's at the other end of the ground, but, just in terms of what that, in terms of having that mix of players, the right mix of players in the team. But I agree that not having that defensive forward has been an issue for us. And I have to, just another comment about players. To be honest, I think I've been in complete denial about not having Gus, and hasn't really sort of filtered through in my brain that we've lost Gus, and that, I half expect him to see him come back out. I do note that he hasn't been on the bench like that.
They talked about that Gus will be on the bench. He came out.
I suspect it was all too much for the fella,
perhaps, yeah.
And I think part of being in denial about not having Gus is also being in denial about how much we've lost with him not being in the team, because it's not just losing a halfback flanker. It's, as George noted about his role, it's his sort of defensive smart. He can roll into the midfield but be defensive. And you could see just with Clary going back, it's no easy thing. Clary, no knock on Clary, he just didn't look comfortable when he went back. Whereas Gus could go back and you'd be fully confident, even if he wasn't playing in halfback flank, that he would do defensive work, whether that be as a defensive winger, defensive mid, or as a halfback flanker. He just would have slotted in perfectly for Salem. I also think we've really missed his leadership a couple of times. In this game, it was exactly the sort of game where Gus would have been one of those players. I guarantee you would have been in the top 5 pressure players, putting his head over the ball. I thought that actually with some of these questions that I haven't really, I guess, come to terms with Gus not being in the team. And apart from the sort of tragedy of it all, the actual impact on our the way we play. And I think I'm probably guilty of underestimating how good a player he was, because he was always sort of sat behind, Clary and Track, I guess, to a degree, even though he was pick 3, or wasn't he, or something. So, I think we really missed him on this weekend just gone, if for no other reason, for the things like the stoppages and being able to take. He was very proactive on the field as well, and I think he was good. He gave him license to make decisions that he wouldn't give other players to do in terms of positioning and where he might run to on the field, to take a kneel when no one's given him a job, or, to push back and help out on a Cameron, or so I'm really feeling the loss, particularly with Bowser out now, Salem out. It's really a big loss, isn't it?
Old Man Rivers says, we have a midfield starting 4, the envy of most teams in the AFL, with Big Max, Track, Clary and the Warrior Jack Viney. However, we seem to be getting dominated more often lately from sides like Brisbane, Sydney and Port Adelaide. How do we switch things up mid-game to counter this dominance? Who should we add to the mix? Cozzy looks good when he makes cameo appearances and will be freed up even more shortly when McAdam makes his long-awaited Demon debut. Can Trent Rivers and Judd McVie transition into midfielders? What other options do we have to take back control and change things up in the midfield when we are getting dominated? George, can you see the D's mixing it up in the middle in the coming weeks?
I think we might have to in a couple of cases. Depends on whether Oliver comes up or not. From the sounds of things, they're planning on him playing in the next game, and if he can hold the ball, which he hasn't been able to since he's had that injury at training, we'll get back to an even 80% Oliver, hopefully. The only other real option we've got at the moment is Laurie, to be able to come into the midfield. I didn't like it when we moved Rivers up, because again, you're taking someone away who's part of that structure down the back. And if Salem's not around there, as we talked before, those are your distributors off the half back line. He may be able to pay one off in the middle for a short period of time, but not as a fill-in player by any stretch. Having Cozzy back next week will make a huge difference, both up forward but also in the midfield. He'll probably have more centre bounce attendances than what he would have otherwise had, to be able to cover him off. So the return of Oliver, the return of Cozzy, will be a positive for us. whether they choose to have, for example, Laurie on the bench as a more of a midfield option than, say, someone like a Wowie, who's obviously not a midfield player at this point in his career. That might be another thing that they'll look to do.
And it's every chance that Colt, will get a chance as a midfielder. As he's got the body and the sort of physique, low centre of gravity, and the sort of Lee Matthews hips to play as a midfielder. And as you noted, he's already done some time in there, so he might get an opportunity because of that mix. And just before you jump to the next question, just going back to question from Demonstrative around the relative inexperience of the team and list depth. It's something I've talked about at the beginning of the season. Windsor, Colt, Howes, Wowie, Chandler, McVie, JVR, Demonstrative notes all played in this game. All debuted playing at senior level in the last 2 seasons, 25% of the selected team. And then you've got Chandler and Cozzy and Sparrow and all in that group. 2 things is that is true. It's both a positive, but it's also I think it's worth considering that in terms of fatigue, in terms of the impact of that 3 games in 13 days or 4 in 19 days, as you said, Andy. Logic again suggests that the players that's most going to impact is the young players, isn't it? So in terms of getting up week to week, and I think we're seeing that with JVR, and it's almost to the stage where you'd think that it wouldn't be bad for JVR to get a bit of a chop out. And just on that game, just in that total players by games in the game just gone, Melbourne had 7 players with less than 50 games to Brisbane's 4. 50 to 99 games, Melbourne had 3 to Brisbane's 2, and this is the big one. Brisbane had 8 players in the 100 to 149 range, and we only had the one. So they weren't actually that sort of, when you add it all up, it's not that far off. But it's a good point around the young list. I think it's a real positive. But young players are going to be a bit more inconsistent than your senior players, and are definitely going to be impacted more by the how tough and intense AFL footy is. So it is a risk to carry that many young players. I think we saw with the advantage Collingwood have got an older list, as I noted, but maybe that was a factor in why they have won so many close games in the last 2 years, or maybe sustaining their effort through the full season. So it'll be something to watch how those young players. I'm most worried about a Chandler and Sparrow. I think they're past. It's really those players in their first couple of seasons in particular. We rely a lot now on McVie, Howes to a lesser extent, and we're already relying on Windsor, it seems to me.
Demon Dynasty in the chat room wants Rivers in the middle. He says that Marty Hawk can cover for Rivers for the Tigers match. Rivers into the middle. Make sure Clary's right for the Cats/Blues, please. If we stuff up Clary's recovery, you can probably kiss any chance of making a preliminary final.
Except Marty Hawk's injured.
No, but I think I'd heard someone say that he'll be back for Anzac Day. Anzac Day, sorry.
And I forgot about he was another defender who's injured.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think he was mentioned.
He might be a bit unlucky because I reckon Turner might come into the team ahead of him. So he might be really unlucky, Marty Hawk, because he did really nothing wrong in his games, did he?
Yeah, no, he was good. Travi14 says, "Hey guys, not all doom and gloom. I think we maybe drank our own bathwater after the South Australian trip. I do have worries with Petty, though. I understand he is a necessity forward at the moment, but I've been saying for the past 2 years that his good performances as a forward were either against average opponents or when he was swung forward in a game, and it was a bit of a surprise factor. He's a great mark and he's actually usually a very good kick, but I think he is a very good defender and the perfect replacement for May when he retires. He has to stay there for now due to our tall forward stocks, but is Petty as a long-term forward sustainable? I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater over this game. We're set up for a Brizzy to win, but after the bye, we better come out breathing a bit of fire. George, Petty, he hasn't exactly been inspiring as a key forward this season. It certainly hasn't. We certainly haven't seen the form that we got glimpses of last season, and granted, he did have an interrupted preseason this year. Does who was that? Travi14 have a point about his performances as a forward last year were against some weaker opposition. I think he played well in the Richmond and the North game when he got injured, and was swung sort of forward. I don't know. Is he off to Adelaide anyway? So it doesn't matter next year.
When he's fit, he is an integral part of either the forward line or the back line. But it's too easy to forget that the guy had a really seriously interrupted preseason, and it was foot injuries, if I remember correctly. Every time you hear of feet injuries, people take a long time to come back from them and get to their best. You saw it with Tom Mack. He was probably out for 12 months, and now Tommy Mack, even at this early stage, is playing some of the best football he's played for ages, because he got the feet injury over. He got a proper pre-season in as he does. Petty was the same. It takes a long time to come back from these things. We've had to use him because we've got no other options at the moment. So, hope he gets better. Hope the break does him the break from the vigours of AFL football does him well. But he is a great mark, and we certainly need. We can't leave it all up to JVR or Ben Brown up forward alone.
I share Travi 14's concern, actually, and I'm sort of in the camp that I don't want to say he's overrated, Petty, but a lot was being made out of playing well as a forward in 4 games or 3 games. I thought, if those 4 games or whatever it was seems to carry a lot of weight. He doesn't look fit. He doesn't look like. I mean, he's a sort of player who, even when he is fully fit, he looks like he's limping. But on the weekend, he looked like he was hobbling around the ground. I didn't think he didn't think he had a good game, and I'm just looking at his numbers, and I've been thinking that for a few weeks. And I'm not normally sort of one hard-headed in this respect, but to be honest, I was of the mind that if we could get a deal with him last year with the Adelaide Crows, then maybe it was time to take it, because if he has got foot injuries, we know Melbourne have, know the history of how many players, particularly bigs, who never come back. I was trying to remember, for some reason, a mental block on the weekend. I was talking to my friend at the footy about who was a player who ended up going to Geelong, and from us, we drafted him in. I'm just trying to think. He was a marking forward, played a handful of really great games as a forward, but then did his foot injury. Yeah, he was a photographer. Completely.
Mitch Clark.
Yeah, Mitch Clark. He never came right, did he, with his foot? And to be honest, it worries me with Petty, and I find them similar sort of players. And I mean, Petty might as well have not played. So we had 2 players that you could, put it this way, Petty's numbers made Fritter look like he's a Brownlow medalist. He had 2 kicks for the game, 2 disposals, disposal efficiency of 0. So neither of his kick hit a target. He had 46 metres gained. He only had 1 inside 50. He had at least one of his disposals was a contested possession. He had negative 0.6 player ratings. I mean, that's appalling, really, isn't it? Time on ground, 77%. I mean, that is his best you could say for his game is he had 1 score involvement and 1 tackle. Essentially, we're playing a man down with those sorts of numbers, particularly when you're adding Clary, and we literally were a man down with Salo not playing. So, yeah, I sort of agree with Travi, or have the same concerns that Travi 14 does, to be frank.
We've got a voicemail to play from Doug Reaman. Neither of you have heard this one, but he's proposing that Lever be swung forward.
G'day, lads. Doug Reamer here. Common poster in the question section. First-time caller, or answering message Lever. Speaking of, I'll keep it short and brief. I mean, it was a pretty disappointing game last week. Seemingly, it's not a great place when we're losing like that. But, I heard them saying that in the commentary during the game last week, I think it was BT said, when Lever had a set shot, that he'd been watching Lever warm up and take plenty of kicks in the warm-up, which they probably do, but he was kicking a lot for goal. And I don't know. I was thinking there watching it last week. Given Petty didn't have the greatest game and is traditionally a backman, why not just throw him back and put Lever forward? I mean, he's a more experienced player. He's probably got better juice. Probably not much of a bustle and hustle type of key forward, but I mean, he holds his own when he has to, and if he can take a mark floating across the pack, surely he can lead the space and maybe clunk a few and give us a few options. Because at the moment, if that forward line doesn't click, we're in a lot of trouble. I mean, I know they were all pretty tired from their gather round, but I don't know. That looked at a different level of, pardon my French, but couldn't be if you know what I mean. Love the pod. Keep going, boys. I'll probably post a question somewhere in the chat as well. But, anyway, have a good one, lads. See ya.
Talk about robbing Peter to pay Paul. Big man, what do you think of swinging Lever forward?
I do my head in as a forward. I reckon he was driving me nuts a bit, Lever. He didn't have a bad game as I noted in terms of his pressure, and I think he was our second highest rated player. Or in fact, he was. He's got no depth on his kicking, though. A couple of times it was just needed to get it over the back. As a forward, I don't think he's ever played a single game as a forward. He doesn't clunk him enough. I would say I'd rather Steve May up forward, who has played as a forward. He was a centre half forward.
If you're
or T-Mac, absolutely. Yeah, so I could see the idea of it, but I think Turner. It's really interesting that George said that he played some time up forward. I could see him being more of a forward than Lever. He's got a good run and jump at it. He is a better one-on-one. I think it's a reasonable idea, but my knock on it would be that Lever is not a great one-on-one player in terms of one-on-one marking. So he'd be like Shaq. He'd be needing to take all of his marks out on a lead, and his kicking doesn't inspire me with much confidence. So it's a no from me as a forward, but Lever for sure. And as you say, T-Mac could roll forward, and I'm glad that George reminded me and mentioned T-Mac before. He was awesome, I thought. He was by far our best player defensively, I thought, at least. I'm surprised Lever rated so highly on those player ratings. And I looked at the tracker numbers just before the show, and he ran at Langdon again, was our who ran the most, 14.9 kilometres, but number 2 for us and number 2 in the game was T-Mac, which was fascinating given, he's a defensive player. So no to me from me for Lever, but I think we've got other options. I don't think our forward line is a major concern, to be honest. I think there's I'm more worried about our halfback flankers.
And for Doug, don't take any advice from BT about a player's capability.
That's a good point.
Yes. All right, scrub that voicemail. All right, let's move on. Just a quick précis of the Casey game. The Casey Demons clinched their first win of the 2024 season with a thrilling come-from-behind victory over Port Melbourne, triumphing by 15 points. It was a lackluster game, yet ended in an engaging finish. Initially trailing, the Demons made a significant comeback in the second half. Port Melbourne had started strong, leading by 26 points early in the second half. However, the momentum shifted when Casey's Lockie Hunter and Daniel Turner, returning from injury, sparked a late surge. Hunter, who had only 5 disposals in the first half, finished the game with 22 disposals. The Demons overcame their deficit by scoring 8 of the last 9 goals. Key contributions also came from Bailey Laurie, 24 disposals, Will Varell, 21 disposals, Tom Fullerton, 21 disposals and 2 goals, Josh Shackey, 19 disposals and 3 goals, Ollie Seston, 3 goals from 20 disposals, and Kynan Brown, 3 goals from 15 disposals. After a couple of early season losses, the win provides a morale boost. However, another scheduled bye hinders any momentum that might have been gained. George, anything quickly you want to add about Casey? I don't know. Did you watch the game?
Yeah, watch the game. I thought it was actually a very interesting game. Both sides were pretty evenly matched, with obviously a bit of talent spread throughout the whole field. The real standouts for me were Will Varell in ruck. He is coming along leaps and bounds. he hasn't quite got the second efforts or the tank necessary, I suppose, to take the big step. But he is certainly improved dramatically. Every game that he plays, he seems to play better. 21 disposals from a first choice ruckman. Tellingly, Varel took most of the ruck duties. Fullerton didn't. So I think Fullerton's almost only a full forward possible, which is not necessarily what we recruited him for. But I think Varel will be a better option as a backup ruck because he can also do the full forward, play up the forward line as well if needed. So, but the other player that really stood out for me was Kynan Brown. 3 goals. He was in everything, around everything, and he just has this habit of being able to bob up and just snap a quick goal here and there. He's got a lot of running. He's got a natural footballer. I just kept putting ticks against his name as he kept playing during the whole game. Turner, of course, was fantastic. Absolutely.
George, what were Brown Dog's numbers?
He kicked 3 goals.
15 disposals and 3 goals.
Yeah, and they're all from general play, which is
he's
great.
Another one who could go. He could make a case for going forward and freeing up, creating some, maybe other, providing opportunity for players to play another position.
Yeah, Turner, of course, 9 marks and 1 goal. Tried up forward, and the fact that they tried him up forward indicates that there might be something in the playbook for him for the future. So, that was an interesting move.
When he went back, sorry, Andy. When Turner went back, did he play better? And if so, he would be backman. Turner goes into overdrive.
No. You could go from back to forward. Or from back.
Forward to back.
Yeah. That's enough, right?
No, I'm actually asking a serious question. I'm not trying to.
Oh, serious question, right?
Did he start back and go forward?
Started back and went forward. I think particularly in the third quarter. But yeah, he was fantastic at both ends of the ground. He's strong marking throughout the whole field, and again just read the ball fantastically. Real disappointments.
Did you, one sec, George, before you go on to, you're just still on Turner.
Yeah.
Am I right in, I don't know if I'm remembering incorrectly, did we try him forward late last year? I can't remember if he was injured or not.
I can't remember. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll see if Casey from Casey knows anything about that, but yeah.
Real disappointments. Kaya Farris-White. 1 kick and 1 mark in the first quarter. That was it for the whole game. Missed a sitter from 15 metres out. Other disappointments, Jefferson with 4 disposals and no score. I think he needs to be showing a bit more from that.
Yeah. He had a good game the last game they played. So
but you've got to do that every game. You've got to be showing something. Yeah. Hunter was surprising. He got plenty of disposals, particularly in the last half. I only had him down. I heard the commentator say only 2 disposals to half time. Honestly, didn't notice him on the ground. I don't know whether he was actually on the ground for a large portion of that. So whether it was a fitness thing or that they were playing, but certainly 22 disposals to full time. Was a big positive. Shaki, I think, kicked a couple of goals, 3 goals, was it, or something like that? Yeah, but all uninspiring. They were, relayed down, free kick, being hit on the chest with a great pass, that sort of thing. There was nothing. It was a typical Shaki game. He scored goals because he was in the right position, but that was it.
I saw about 30 seconds of that game. And was going to watch it as live, but then I saw the results. So I killed that. And the 30 seconds I saw was some player running full tilt into someone else and smacking into him. And the commentators even mentioned how loud the hit was. And, you blame him down. It was Shaki running into him.
Which was even more surprising because about 2 minutes into the first quarter, he dislocated his shoulder.
Right.
So, yeah. And then he came back. Before he got off the ground, the commentator said, it's popped back in, and they came back out again.
And we haven't heard anything about that yet because
No.
That if he's done ligament damage or even I dislocated my shoulder, I guess I broke bone. So
bit different. But yeah, it was most surprising. I thought, great, that's the end of him for the day.
Well, that's a pretty positive review, George. I mean, there's 3 players there that Brown Dog for one. It's great to the Hunter's back in the frame. He's I'd sort of forgotten about him, to be honest, but he'll help out with that halfback sort of flank issue, I think, in terms of giving us another option. Brown Dog potentially as well. And I'm thrilled that Varel seems to be taking strides because I really think he's got a big future, Varel, and he could come in to, he may have to come in at some point, either because JVR's injured or Maxi's injured, or, potentially to give JVR a chop out. The one that I'm really pleased though is Turner, because I think that he is someone who can slot straight into either end if he's been playing up forward, but obviously as a backman he can go down there and potentially freeing up, as you suggest, Andy, T-Mac to go up forward if we feel like we need another marking option, or maybe we want to give Benny Brown a couple of weeks off, to bring T-Mac back up forward and Turner into his spot. He's got the defensive smart to play T-Mac's role. And so I'm loving, that Turner's taking care of business, and if he gets into the back into the seniors, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Fantastic. Well, we were going to do some changes and a preview, but I think we're going to leave that to next week. We'll do a mini show. By mini, it's probably still an hour and a half. We'll do a show.
Not a McCoulter mini show, a mini show.
We'll do a show on changes and a preview of the Anzac Eve game next Monday, and possibly, what did you say, Bin Man, that we might have a look at where our direct competitors are at this early stage of the season. Might have to revise some of our predictions that we made pre-season.
I won't have to revise too many of mine, Andy. Might have been pretty accurate thus far, I think.
Well, finally, Adelaide got on the board, so I'm almost there with one of mine. So, yep. All right. Okay, well, that's where we're going to leave it. I had in my notes we'll be back in 2 weeks, but it looks like we'll be back next week for a replay of the grand final. If you want to listen to the show live, then please head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to Camo D's and Avec Sands. Thank you to our commenter from Facebook, Victoria L. Thank you to our voicemailer, Doug Riemann. Thank you to our caller, Redlegs23. Great call. Your questions and comments are an integral part of the show. So thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Detox, Lazy, Dino Rover, Demon Dynasty, D Future 15, Tarax Club, Smurf, At the Break of Gorn, KLV, Buck Naked, Sam 6172, Demon Cat, Phil C, Nairobi D, Oh My D's, Garbo, Watson 11, MPC, Delightful Play, Demonstrative, Old Man Rivers, Travi 14, and I'll also thank Murdoch 516, Track Forever, and Monocular, who did provide some questions about some changes. I'll include them in the show next week. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bimman, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget, leave a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from. We'll read it out on next week's show. Go Demons!
Go Red Lickers!
I've got this feeling